apologise, there's a cock-up with Zumba. So Zumba's on, and we're here. What can I say? Niel Faulkner, well, I've got a loud voice, Neil's got a loud voice. What can we do apart from try and talk over Zumba? So welcome to this meeting, How Big Business Stole the Olympics. This is a meeting held by Counterfire. I'm going to be encouraging the people here who are not members of Counterfire to join Counterfire. The speaker is Niel Faulkner. He is an archaeologist, he's an activist, and he's just published a book on the Olympics called A Visitor's Guide to the Olympics. The way that we're going to hold this meeting is Neil's going to sort of talk for about half an hour, open it up for any questions, any comments. I'd especially like to encourage anybody that was involved in the Stop the Olympic Missiles campaign to fill everybody in on the decision made in the High Court today. And also just any questions for Neil, and then we'll sum up. So, Neil.
Okay, I am going to talk very loud in the first part of the meeting. We've been told this is going to stop at 7 o'clock. It would be a great relief to all of us. Can everybody hear me? Good, okay. Look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a series of Olympic snapshots, if you like, to make a point about the character of the Olympics, the political character of the Olympics throughout its history. Because a central argument of our rulers is that the Olympics are not political and sport more generally is not political. And I want to confront that argument head on. And I'm taking these snapshots because, of course, the Olympics has a very long history. And I want to illustrate different ways in which the Olympics have been and can be political, and what the implications are for us now confronting the London 2012 Olympics. I'm going to start by taking us right back to my own period, and this is the only reference I'm going to make to the ancient games. And I'm going to introduce you to a character called Alcibiades. Alcibiades was a rich Athenian playboy. If you want a mental picture, imagine some kind of ghastly cross between Tony Blair and Richard Branson, except 25 years younger, and you've got a sense of what this guy was like. Immensely rich and a political opportunist who was trying to build a political career for himself. And in trying to build a political career for himself in Athens, what did he do but enter 7 chariots in the chariot race at Olympia in 416 BC. He entered in the chariot racing because that meant he didn't have to have contact with the common people that would do other sports. Equestrian sports, then as now, were tops sports because they were immensely expensive. He entered 7 chariots in the race to guarantee pretty well that one would win, and it did. And he then threw a huge party at Olympia, to which he invited everybody from his own city as a way of building his political career, as a way of raising his kudos at home. So there is nothing new about the Olympics being used in a political way by our rulers. It runs right through the history of the games back to ancient times. And if you think about the modern games, it has been so in relation to the modern games also, but with the politics changing as society changes. So when Pierre de Coubertin, a French aristocrat, immensely rich, very aristocratic and Catholic, extremely reactionary, set up the new games, which of course the first of them in 1896. He was doing it partly for nationalist reasons, because international tensions in Europe at the time were rising towards the First World War. The Germans were digging up ancient Olympia, and the Germans were the great rivals of the French, so Coubertin suggested that what the French might do is to refound in the present the Olympic Games. That was going to be their equivalent contribution to the development of our culture. And his notion of what sport was designed to do in the context of the late 19th century was to develop the athleticism and the competitive spirit of the social elite. So it's about nationalism, but it was also about elitism. Coubertin didn't say that working class people couldn't take part in the games, but his view, generally speaking, was that not many of them would be able to, because he was an unashamed elitist who believed that virtue was inherited by social classes, and generally speaking it would be the elite who participated in the new games founded in 1896, nor did he think that women should take part in the games. There were no women competitors at all in 1896. So the new games, founded in 1896, the first time at Athens, reflected the nationalism, the imperialism, the social elitism, and the sexism of the social class of the founder and those he gathered around him to make it possible. That's my second snapshot. 416 BC in Alcibiades is the first. Coubertin and the 1896 Olympics is the second. Here's the third one for you. I'm going to take you to Berlin in 1936. Now, Berlin really, in 1936, was the first occasion when the state invested massively in constructing a great Olympic complex for reasons of state nationalism, but more than that, because the 1936 Olympics were of course organised by the Nazis, and they had a racial agenda. The Olympics were about reasserting the power of Germany and German imperialism and Germany's role in Europe, and also about asserting the centrality to history, as the Nazis viewed it, of the Aryan race. And to make a connection between the Aryan master race that had just taken power in Germany and the Aryan Greek antecedents, as the Nazis saw them, who founded the Olympic Games in the ancient world. To make that connection, they organised the torch relay. The torch relay, about which there is so much in the media at the moment, was invented by the Nazis in 1936, so that they could take a flame from Greece, run it across Europe, and bring it into the Berlin Stadium that had been built for the occasion. All filmed. They invented it. No, I realise that. They're going to stop. I know you've got it in there. They're going to stop, we think, don't we? At 7 o'clock.
They are. 10 minutes.
They've got 10 minutes. Okay. But if you don't hear, then do on our repeat. Yes, they did invent it. And I'm going to just quote the purpose of the torch. But the torchbearers were to demonstrate the beauty and strength of German youth. So they were meant to be a display of the body beautiful of the Aryan master race. That was the intention. And this was part of a huge, great pageant organised by the Nazis at the 1936 Games. Now that's another snapshot. The use of the Games to promote German nationalism, German imperialism, and Nazi racism. Here's another snapshot. I'm going to take you to the Montreal Games in 1976. This is at the time of the Cold War. And imperialism had been reconfigured. The imperial conflict that had dominated the first 40 years of the 20th century had been a conflict essentially between Britain and Germany, up until 1941. That was the dominant conflict around which the various conflicts between the great powers were organised, the central axis, if you like, of global imperial conflict. In 1941 that changed, because the Soviet Union and the United States came into the Second World War, and coming out of the Second World War, there was a remodelled world in which two superpower blocs confronted each other. A state capitalist bloc on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain, a Western capitalist bloc on the western side of the Iron Curtain, and they competed with each other in creating vast nuclear arsenals, which fortunately were never used against each other. We wouldn't be here now. They fought a series of proxy wars against each other in various parts of the world, most notoriously the Vietnam War. And they also engaged in a kind of propaganda war with each other, one expression of which was participation in the Olympics, the supreme international sporting festival then as now. And they invested huge amounts of wealth in creating sporting facilities, in subsidising sport, in backing the training of athletes in order to raise their position in the medal stakes, such that at the Montreal Olympics in 1976, 3 countries took more than half the gold medals between them, and they were the Soviet Union, which got 47, East Germany, which is a fairly small country, which got 40, a measure of the degree to which the East German ruling class was pumping resources into the training of athletes, and the United States, which got 34. So the athletic competition was distorted by different levels of investment available to different states as they competed with each other for the prestige of winning medals at the Olympics. Now that brings me to the last snapshot, if you like, which is London 2012. More than a snapshot, I'm going to talk at slightly greater length about London 2012, because the point of all of these examples is they show the way in which top-level sport is used by our rulers to promote political messages and different political messages in different periods. And that means that London 2012 is a showcasing of neoliberal capitalism. It's showcasing of a particular kind of capitalism which has developed over the last 30 years or so, which is why it has the form that it does. And it is a very distinctive form. It provides us with a window, in a sense, into the nature of the society in which we are living. It exposes, in a way, in the way it's organised, the inner workings of this society. It's about class. It reflects the grotesque and the growing social inequalities that scar British society and world society, and which have been growing in the last 30 years of neoliberalism, has been growing since the 1970s. It reflects that in all sorts of ways. In the pricing of the tickets, in the ticketing lottery, which meant that most working class people didn't have enough money to stake to have any real chance of getting any tickets. People on benefits couldn't afford any tickets at all. A ticketing system which means that the majority of people who live in the area where the games are taking place do not have tickets and will not be going. So the whole thing, in a sense, is being done at their expense as taxpayers, at their inconvenience, but without any benefit to them at all, because they haven't got tickets to go. That class privilege is reflected in the games lanes. In the ancient world, the athletes walked to the Olympics like everybody else. In 1948, in London, the athletes went to the Olympics on the tube along with everybody else. Not now. Not under neoliberal capitalism. Now the rich have their own lanes with a fleet of 4,000 BMWs to take them from their 5-star hotels to the Olympic venues and back, with all the traffic lights shut down, with all the pedestrian crossings shut down, with 50 road closures, pushing us onto congested roads and hurling us onto an overloaded public transport system. No delays for them, no delays for the elite. That is about naked, in-your-face, brazen class privilege. And there are the evictions that are going on in the East End, in the Stratford area, because landlords could double and treble and quadruple the rents they charge for their properties for the duration of the games. Yeah, good idea. It's going to end in five minutes. And the reason why private landlords can do it is because controls over tenancies, controls over rents, all of that's gone. It's gone in a bonfire of regulations, which means that people are now, when they try and get property, when they're renting property, are exposed to the full force of market forces without any kind of statutory protection. So what's going on is about class. And we shouldn't be surprised because of who's running the games. I'm going to tell you something about LOCOG, which is the London Organising Committee. It's made up of 19 people. None of those people is elected. Every single one of them is appointed. They are 17 white men. There is one woman, and she doesn't really count because she's Princess Anne. Half of those men are businessmen, and most of the others have significant business interests. They are people like Coe himself, who of course is a millionaire businessman and a Tory politician. There are people like Colin Moynihan, who is the head of the British National Olympic Committee, who's from the same stable. He's also a millionaire businessman and also an ex-Tory politician. The Chief Executive Officer of LOCOG is a Goldman Sachs banker. The Chief Financial Officer is a partner in the city accounting and consulting firm Deloitte. Little wonder then that this is an appointed committee of millionaires. Little wonder then that when Coe was asked by the democratically elected representatives of the London people, how many tickets have you reserved for the Toffs at the top events, at the opening ceremony, at the 100 metres finals and so on? He wouldn't answer. He was asked repeatedly, how many of the tickets at the top events have been reserved for the elite? He wouldn't answer the question because he's not accountable to democratically elected representatives, because this is an appointed quango representing the kind of neoliberal world, the world without democracy, the world without democratic accountability that they are constructing. So this is about class. The neoliberal games, London 2012, are about class. It's about something else. It's about corporate power. And the corporate power is truly shocking. I mean, in 1976, there was a lot of money swirling around. There were a lot of corporations making a lot of profit out of the Montreal Olympics. But it wasn't the naked, blanket, corporate sponsorship draped over everything that we have now, which is a reflection of the shift that is taking place towards corporate domination of the economy and corporate domination of society. So you have absurdities now. You have a corporation like Dow Chemicals, which is responsible for the worst industrial disaster in human history. It killed 25,000 people, permanently injured another 100,000, and the contaminated groundwater at Bhopal in India has still not been cleared up. The corporation responsible for that is one of the Olympic sponsors. The sponsors include Atos. Atos is sponsoring the Paralympic Games for disabled athletes. Atos is an €8 billion company, international company, that has the contract from the British government for handing disabled people off benefits and driving them into poverty, and in some cases to suicide, because there are now clearly attested cases of disabled people driven off benefits by Atos who've committed suicide. They are the sponsors of the Paralympic Games. It includes organisations like BP of Deepwater Horizon fame, BP drilling Canadian tar sands, BP, who must be one of the biggest corporate polluters in the world. They are the sustainability partner of the London 2012 Olympics. You couldn't make it up. It's a grotesque caricature of corporate domination of what should be something that is controlled by a society, that's accountable society, that's a celebration, really, of our democracy. Then there's a third thing, which is also being showcased at London 2012, and there are people here, of course, who've been involved in the campaign about this, and that is the war on terror, militarisation, which is going on in East London. I mean, no doubt many people here know more about it than I do because they've been actively involved in the campaign. Suffice it to say, this has nothing to do with security. If they were worried about security, they wouldn't have set up the games lanes. The thing about the games lanes is, it's about pass privilege, but if you're a terrorist, it's the terrorist equivalent of a pirate map where X marks the spot. You know exactly where the toffs are going to be, going up and down in their BMWs on the games lanes. If they were really worried about security, nonsense like that wouldn't be happening. The 50,000 security that they're going to have deployed and the spectacle of ground-to-air missiles being put on top of blocks of flats is a showcasing of war on terror militarisation. And what's the war on terror about? The war on terror is about justifying imperialism in the Middle East and in Afghanistan. The war on terror is about Islamophobia and the scapegoating of Muslim communities in Britain. And the war on terror is about what used to be called a strategy of tension, where in a discontented society, an alienated society, a society with accumulating bitterness at the base of society, you distract people's attention from the real issues. You distract people's attention from the growing poverty, from the cuts, from the privatisation, by constructing a phantom enemy against which we all have to be on guard, and focusing people's political attention on the need to increase security. It's all about that kind of thing. It's about showcasing the military face, if you like, of neoliberalism. So I think I might be able to quieten down a little bit as I come to the conclusion. And there's one final thing I want to say about the character of the London 2012 Olympics, and it's linked with that last point really, about the kind of society we're living in. The estimates about how much they've actually spent on London 2012 vary. Some people say it's 12 billion, other people say it's as much as 24 billion if you factor everything in. That is an absolutely grotesque amount of money to be spent on this thing when they are imposing absolutely massive cuts on a scale that we haven't seen since the 1920s on our public services and on ordinary working people. The 20 billion of cuts that they're imposing on the National Health Service over the next 5 years, over the length of the government, that could be made good by the cost of the Olympic Games. The cuts that they are imposing on the disabled, on poor people, could be made good by the cost of the Olympic Games. There is a grotesque distortion of priorities, and of course when they talk about a legacy, there is no legacy. There is never a legacy. They say this every time as the Olympic Games move around the world. They talk about the legacy. There's never a legacy. And if you think about how that money could be used to regenerate economies, to regenerate communities, to rebuild public services, to put money in the pockets of poor people, if you think about all of the different ways in which those resources could actually be used, it immediately becomes apparent that this is a very inappropriate way for us to be using our resources. Now, in the last 5 minutes or so of the introduction, I'm just going to say a bit about protest. Because if our rulers use the Olympic Games to project political messages, we are entitled to answer those messages with our own voice. And that's why the Stop the Missiles campaign has been such a very good thing, and it's why the demonstration, which we hope is going to get everybody who has a grievance about the way London 2012 is being done together, the demonstration on the 28th of July is important, because there is a proud history of protest as well in relation to the Olympic Games, precisely because of the way in which our rulers use it to communicate their messages at our expense. In 1936, there was an alternative games at Barcelona, and working class activists went from London, they went from this area, from right where we are, Rock Stepney, I mean just down the road, I mean Jewish tailors, Communist Party tailors from Stepney set out in July 1936 to go to the Barcelona Games, which was set up as an alternative to the Nazi-run Berlin Games. Now, the Barcelona Games didn't happen, and it didn't happen because a fascist military coup took place in July 1936, and Spain exploded into revolution. Those three Stepney Jewish communist tailors then fought in the anti-fascist militias against Franco. Let me give you another example. Let me take you to Melbourne in 56. In 56, the Russian tanks were sent into Budapest to crush a working class revolution. They say that in the water polo pool in the final, when the Russians played the Hungarians, there was blood in the water and the Russians gave up. So the Hungarian team had a position on the invasion of their country. Not only that, but at the closing ceremony, the athletes broke out of their national contingents, linked arms, and carried out, in effect, around the stadium, a demonstration of international unity, rejecting the national division that was imposed upon the Olympic Games, and of course that is the central part of the way in which the Olympics is managed. The most famous protest, of course, is that which took place in Mexico City in 1968, when Tommy Smith and John Carlos gave the Black Power salute on the podium. And there are one or two things to be said about that, because there was a history to it. John Carlos was a black, working class, teenage hustler, brought up in Harlem. He had experience, though, of East Texas, where he went to train as an athlete. And he tells a story about how when he arrived in East Texas, this is towards the end of the civil rights movement, and the expectation was that maybe East Texas had been desegregated, but it hadn't. The first thing he encountered when he got off the airport, aircraft and went into the airport terminal, was that there were separate toilet facilities for whites and coloureds. And he inspected both of them. He took his kid into the whites toilet facilities, and then he took his kid into the blacks facilities, and he saw the difference. He met Malcolm X. He met Martin Luther King. And when John Carlos stood on the podium and made the Black Power salute, wearing the distinctive black gloves of the Black Power movement, wearing beads, wearing a badge, he was making a political protest against the deeply, deeply ingrained racism of American society, of which he had had direct experience. Now, the point is, there is a long tradition of turning the messages around. They want to use the Olympic Games in one way to communicate one set of messages. Our side needs to communicate an alternative view. The Cameron and Co and Clegg and the rest of them have turned the London 2012 Games into a pageant of class privilege, of corporate power, and of war on terror, militarisation. Their message is that Britain is open for business. Their message is that Britain is run by the millionaires, the corporations and the arms manufacturers. Our job on the 28th of July is to communicate a different message about a different kind of society that we're going to be fighting to build over the next few years.
So, would anybody like to start off with a question, any comments, any experiences from the campaign?
I thought it was useful.
Thank you, Rachel.
I read through that things that I didn't even realise, even though I'm involved in the cabinet network. But there are issues there and some of the things you said that I didn't realise had happened. So it was very interesting.
It's important, and then if anybody else wants to make any comments, just let me know.
Okay, that's fine. So I can't look, I'll deal with something very, very quickly because I don't really know the answer. I'm absolutely sure the official Olympic logo doesn't spell Zion. I think that's just accidental. I also think it's an extremely hideous logo, and our version that Rachel was referring to is a much better one. There are T-shirts with that on. But I don't trust conspiracy theories that you hear on the internet. Would be my general advice. LOCOG, as far as I'm aware, is just simply appointed by the government. I think it's as simple as that. And my attitude to the Olympics is that I don't really care if people want to go to the Olympics, and I don't really care if people want to organise a sports festival. That's not in and of itself. That's not a political issue. If that's what people want to do in their leisure time. The issue is the way in which this particular top-level international sporting event is used by our rulers to project a whole series of hideous political messages. And we can't disentangle the two. That's the thing. The way in which London 2012 is being done is because of the people who control it. And that's why we should be protesting against it. Not to say to people don't go to the Olympics, but to say to people we should be protesting against the way in which the Olympics are actually being managed. Keynes, you see, it's true. Keynes did say exactly what you're quoting as saying, but it would be better than having people digging up sleeping policemen and then putting them back afterwards, to have them building hospitals or schools or affordable housing or doing any one of a whole number of other socially useful things. The point about public works is that yes, public works are a good thing, public services are a good thing. Keynesian demand economics makes good sense in a depression. But the best way to spend the money is not actually, it seems to me, to be producing this huge, great white elephant. Those are the quick points, and I'm just going to come back on one of the bigger points, and then say more on the second thing in a minute. And it's the bid process. What has clearly happened, and I think you're probably right that the corporatisation takes off in the 1980s, but going back before the 1980s. There was a real ramping up of the bidding process, with different nation states competing with each other to host the games, having to offer ever bigger and better games and ever bigger and better games facilities. So you get an inflation of cost. And because of the amounts of money swilling around in terms of building contracts, corporate contracts, television sponsorship and all that, we're talking about vast amounts of money swilling around. And where it goes and who gets it is determined by a very, very small group of people. So the IOC has become absolutely riddled with corruption and bribery because of that, and and they are individually part of the international bourgeoisie, the international elite, expecting to absolutely rake it off. So when they spend the 4 years between games just going around the world, getting the 5-star treatment everywhere they go, because everybody is fawning on them, everybody is trying to buy their favour. I mean, that is a disgusting process. The whole of the bidding process, and it seems to be that it's intrinsic to the way in which the games are run now. Okay, I'll stop.
Has anybody got any more questions or comments they want before the finals?
Just a comment about feeling in charge.
There's going to be a book launch of a book called A People's History of London. It's written by Lindsay German and John Rees, who are both the leading members of Counterfire and also leading members of Stop the War Coalition, and authors within their own rights. Just quickly, the history of London we've been waiting for, told with elegance and precision. That was a review by Ken Loach, and that's going to be next Thursday, the 9th of July at 7 o'clock at the Brick Lane Bookshop. There'll be a really nice evening. You're welcome to come, please do. Neil.
Okay. What I'd like to address in just concluding is this question about the role of protest. You see, there is no. I mean, I understand what you're saying about how this, you know, the biggest global protest in human history didn't stop the war in Iraq, and that's absolutely correct. But I also agree with what Chris has said as a kind of corrective to that. I think we came close, and I think there are other occasions where we defeated them. I think we defeated them on Vietnam. I think the combination of mass protest across the world and the resistance of the Vietnamese defeated them on Vietnam. I think also, but for the anti-war movement, I think it's quite possible that Iran would have been attacked by now. I don't think there's any question at all that imperialism, global imperialism, has been pushed onto the back foot and is much less confident because of the scale of the resistance that they're likely to face. I think Blair's premiership was broken by the Iraq war. I think Blair was pretty dead in the water in terms of his public standing after his decision to go to war in Iraq. And ultimately, of course, he went. Protest does have an impact, even when there isn't an outright victory. Very often what it's doing is it's actually shifting the balance of forces and having an impact that you can't immediately read. And there isn't any other way. And colleagues were talking about, you know, the attacks on democracy and civil liberties and the difficulty of mounting protest. I tell you, democracy is never granted. It always has to be taken. And insofar as we have democracy, they tolerate it because of the strength of support for it, not because they like it. They don't like it. And insofar as they possibly can, they reduce it and they shrink it and they try and shut it down. So we have to continue to fight to defend it. And essentially the way you defend democratic space, the right to protest civil liberties, is by organising mass protest. The more people we put on the street, the greater the space that we create for democracy and for the voice of ordinary people to be heard and have an influence on events. But it's bigger than that, because we are facing an absolutely massive crisis of the entire system, a crisis which has an economic dimension and a crisis which has a dimension of imperialist war as well. And we are going to have to build big, huge, massive popular movements of protest if we're going to produce an effective response to that. So what I'd say about the 28th of July is this. I mean, please everybody take a bundle of these leaflets advertising the 28th of July. Let's see if we can get all the people who've been involved in the missiles campaign, along with all of the other people who've got different issues, which mean that they're protesting about the Olympics. Let's see if we can get everybody together and make it a protest, possibly of many hundreds, possibly even of thousands, if we build it well. Let's try and turn it into a big celebration of an alternative vision for what Britain should be like. But I think we also need to regard it as a stepping stone. And it's a stepping stone in the sense that we're not going to, realistically, we're not going to shut down the games lanes. We're not going to get Dow's sponsorship lifted. It's going to be a protest which simply puts an alternative voice in front of the world's media. I mean, that's the thing to have in mind. The whole world's media is going to be there, so it's a good occasion to put this alternative view. But there's a sense in which this is a stepping stone towards building something much, much bigger, because the TUC has called the demonstration, another anti-cuts demonstration, for the 20th of October. Now the last one, on the 26th of March last year, was 500,000 strong. It was the biggest trade union demonstration ever mounted in British history. There is a possibility that the demonstration this autumn could be 1 million strong, and if it is, then it could actually begin to turn the tide on the austerity offensive and the privatisation offensive which is being mounted against working people, and in a sense which is symbolised by the London 2012 Olympics. So this is about a long-term process of building the mass movements that we need, mass movements which ultimately must be movements of millions of people, and as Chris has already indicated, Counterfire sees itself as absolutely situated in that business of building this kind of mass movement. Starting small, starting with local protests, but building towards something big that can actually begin to shift British politics in a different direction.
Thank you very much for coming. If you would like to stay in touch via our Counterfire email, I did forget to put a piece of paper around. Would you like to come to the front and just put it in my notebook for now?
Can I just say one thing as well? If there are people who've been involved in the missiles campaign, or anybody else for that matter, who wants to get actively involved in building the demonstration on the 28th of July, we have an open organising meeting tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, at SOAS, the School of Room G3. So anybody who wants to, and we would greatly appreciate anybody who's been involved in the missiles campaign being there and helping us to build the 28th of July.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.